Juan Dhas.
Professor O'Kane, it's been a while.
It has been a while, but it is fantastic to have you here, and you're back on playing some feminine wings. And you're very welcome.
Thanks for having me.
You're very welcome. Just learning to speak again.
Are we leaving this
after
in?
the long hiatus? Juan, you're first of all, you're very welcome to the channel, and second of all, and maybe second should be first, a huge congratulations on Aether, your third record.
Oh, thank you so much.
Third record is just fantastic. I mean, that's why I titled it the best modern jazz guitar record of 2024. Now, I'm sure that some people are going to say, yeah, 2024 hasn't all the way happened yet. Oh, well. So now, this is your third record.
Mm-hmm.
You're not under 30 years old anymore.
So, no. It was recorded when I was under 30.
Okay.
So we can say that.
Yeah. That being the case, this is your most mature effort, unquestionably. And I want to know what makes this one different from the other two.
What makes this one different from the other two? Aside from the obvious choices of instrumentation, I've chosen to go with strings, using some choirs here and there. I'm singing, which is an interesting experiment for me. And just experimenting with synths as well. I think it's, as you said, just kind of a more mature take. It was between the last record and this one was probably about 5 years, give or take, maybe a little less. So a lot of influences have come along, things that I've been listening to, just kind of permeating my sound, and my sound's undergone plenty of changes, both in terms of technique, in terms of how I'm recording things or how I've set up my sound these days. So I'd say it's just a very different record in general because things have changed.
Well, what have been some of your influences? Because I love the grooves that are on there. Obviously, there's a lot of meter hell in there. And
some beautiful ones.
Yeah, please expand on that and how those influences got you to create that sort of thing.
Sure. So a few years back, I went under like a very heavy rhythm trip and just started exploring rhythm and time feel a lot more deeply, which I think has been wonderful just, to really sit with rhythm for a bit, because I think it's very easy for people to forget that. And especially guitar players, I think sometimes we can forget about being very intentional rhythmically. So I was also, when I was living in Dubai for that brief period in 2019, 2020, I was playing a lot with Ganawa, some North African music, playing a lot of odd meter music, just experimenting with different meters or polymeters and diving deeper into that world. What else?
Well, how did you do that? Because I think that for the people listening who don't know anything about African rhythms or odd rhythms, to them it's just a mystery if you say, yeah, I've been working on rhythms. So what exactly did you do? Because what I want people to do is steal everything
everything
that
I
you
put on
set
the record
forth, so they can be inspired and kind of figure out, because it's difficult to figure out sometimes where one is on your tunes.
So I think it's interesting to note that when I speak of Ganawa, so I'm talking about a North African rhythm. I didn't just take rhythms from North Africa or the Middle East. There are some Latin American rhythms on there, and how I went about working on them was pretty much through immersion and listening to a lot of the music and getting in touch with what is a core pulse. So for example, if you've got like a Ganawa thing, I'm always tuning into this kind of like a triplet groove and trying to figure out where at least the strong beats. With the odd meter thing, or really making it feel more comfortable and not just here's a classic 7, how to really integrate it and play around with it as much as you'd like or as much as you can. I would do experiments of putting it against 3 or groups of 3, which would actually be the groove for the first tune on the record, Socotra, where you have an 11 clave, so 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, right? Which is actually a traditional clave from Yemen, from Yemeni oud music. And then the other hand, I just had groups of 3, so 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So if you put them together, you end up with kind of a cyclical nature of 2, 3, 1, 2, 3.
And so when you were writing this, how did you go about doing that? Like, did you have some kind of MIDI thing that you wrote on, and then you were like, okay, I can hear what both of those parts sound like, and then start playing guitar over it?
So, yeah. So if anyone has actually checked out the previous interview we did, we went through like a little bit of my writing process and writing for the trash can, as I called it.
Wait, we did another interview?
I believe so. Might be interesting for your viewers to check out.
Yes, and right here you can see wherever the link is. Check it out. Nice plug.
Anytime.
Checks in the mail.
Happy to help out. But yeah, I would talk about the writing for the trash can process of just, playing something, singing something over the top, and then not really having any expectations as to what comes out. But then to actually get ideas for how rhythms would sound, I would kind of experiment with just hearing kind of in my head, or I would actually do a voice memo of the groove that I had, or the melody or something, and then see how that fits, or try do both in some way. And then I would actually put it into Logic, and that would actually start up the whole process of kind of producing the record as we went along.
Oh, very interesting. Very interesting. Now, okay, so I want to diverge from the writing thing, because we're kind of talking about the writing thing. We're in a culture that is either mired or blessed with, blazing guitar stuff. You turn on Instagram, and the next guy and the next guy after that and the next guy is like one step better technically, and there's virtuosic. Oh my God, it's so mind-blowing, I can't even say it.
Right.
There's so much virtuosity in Instagram, for instance, YouTube, of course. How did you manage to almost do the antithesis and steer clear of that? I got to give credit to an old mentor of mine, the bassist I worked with in Dubai, Daniele Camarda, who's a wonderful Italian bass player, and really just a wonderful thinker on the instrument. And he was always giving me plenty of pieces of advice during my time working there. And one thing he made very clear to me multiple times over was he would just sometimes pull me aside after a set that we played or after a rehearsal. He's like, he'd find different ways of saying it every time, but the one that really stuck with me was, your technical facility is one of your greatest assets, but it's also your cage. And that got me at least thinking about, okay, I have technical facility, and, you say that I've kind of avoided it, but, there are moments where I do enjoy playing fast or playing technically difficult things, and it's fun to do. But then how do we convert this into a musical statement? And one thing that I realized, both from listening back to old videos of how I played back then, or, kind of reflecting on what my mentor had to say at the time, was that placement was more important. And sometimes that if you completely, let's say, took your solo and just blasted through it with nonstop 16ths or 30 seconds the whole way through, you don't create enough peaks and valleys or contrast in what you're saying in your solo. So then it can have the opposite effect. I think it depends on the music and the musician, but it can have the opposite effect where you just create
too much of one sound that people just automatically tune out at some point. So and round about that time I was also getting into motivic development and working on that a little more and being more intentional with the phrases I play. And around about this time, I also started making my life a little bit more difficult on the guitar, raising my action higher, mostly for tonal and dynamic reasons, but then also switching to fingers eventually, and trying to put myself, or playing slide, not using drive pedals anymore, not using delay pedals anymore, trying to find ways to get myself out of my comfort zone so that I couldn't rely on maybe things that I'd worked out.
Well, not only that, it doesn't really sound like anybody.
Oh, that means the world.
I mean, as you and I have spoken, at length, we have talked about, if you take, I'm sure a lot of people have talked about this, if you take overdrive and you play over some kind of groove, even if it's odd meter groove or if it's a fusion groove, immediately, if you're playing legato, you're going to sound like Alan Holdsworth. If you're using a pick and you're picking everything, well, it could be any number of guys who do that, from Frank Mbali to Mike Stern to any of the newer guys.
Yeah.
But I mean, those people loom large, obviously.
And the Holdsworth comparison was something that came up a bunch, and it still happens, and I fully admit that Holdsworth was a huge influence on me musically, compositionally, and as far as my playing goes. But I think one thing I really wanted to do with this record, and just kind of my playing in the past few years as a whole, is, okay, how can I slowly, move out of the shadow of Alan, which is a hard task to do, and hopefully it's something that just becomes easier over time.
Yeah, I think it's a very difficult one to escape, because it's so much fun to do.
Right.
And he's already carved that channel, and it's a wide channel. So it is, you're right, it's very, very difficult to get out of. Extremely. Now talk about, if you wouldn't mind, talk about why you ditched the pick and how you went full finger style on us.
Funnily enough, same thing. One day my mentor, we did like a small 2-week intensive workshop where we worked on a lot of odd meter, polyrhythms, polymeters, just getting really comfortable with rhythm. But one thing we did that was really interesting for me was dynamic work. And the exercise he had us do in this small 2-week workshop with the other musicians that were working at this place was we had to do a dynamic ladder, so to speak. So just take one note and play for all the way, just that one note, quarter notes, let's say, from triple piano to triple forte and back down. And he made a comment, this is Daniele we're talking about, just to clarify. You may want to, you did that really well. You may want to consider going without the pick to get even more dynamic control. And it's also a more personal sound. And both of those kind of nuggets kind of just stuck in my head for whatever reason. And I had intermittent moments where I would try it. Probably one of the more memorable ones was after I came back to Colombia, like sometime in 2021. I gave myself like a month-long challenge where no matter what would come up, if it was a gig, if it were a recording session, if it were a rehearsal, anything that would be, I would still try and play without the pick in that session. And that, I think, at least opened the door a little bit. And then one thing that really cemented it for me was when I started to play slide. Because, I used to use stone picks. I still have them, anytime I need to use a pick for whatever reason. But, slide and a pick just doesn't feel right. There's a feel thing that kind of just doesn't sit well. And, you lose a lot of bottom end on the note as well. So I didn't want to switch from fingers to pick whenever I wasn't playing slide. And then eventually that just kind of transitioned into a normal thing because I was enjoying the sound of how the finger attack was working with the tone. Yeah, and I found to echo that point of a more personal sound, you get more tonal variety.
Were you able to do things, different things that you could never do with a pick?
I actually don't know. I've never considered that thought. Like I've never maybe tremolo at most, like a classical style tremolo.
But not big intervals or that kind of thing?
I mean, I was primarily a hybrid picker, so I was already used to doing that.
Oh, okay.
And to begin with, as a hybrid picker, I was already using these three fingers as well as the pick. So one thing that I did really have to train was actually using my index finger more. Just because I found that if I relied on my thumb too much for the low notes, you wouldn't get the definition you need for certain lines. And that's where the index finger came into play, into actually helping linear definition.
Okay. Linear definition. No, I understand what you're saying. And, as a thumb picker, you're speaking my language. What style would you call your music?
I've had people ask me this since I've shown some people things about the music, or since the singles came out, Socotra and Scarlet Thread. And I honestly don't know, because I can say that even though primarily I guess I'm a jazz musician, and it fits under the jazz umbrella, so to speak, in that there is heavy improvisation on the record. Like all the solos are improvised, and it's kind of around a form, and we're taking on jazz elements. There's even a swing tune on the record. It's not, I wouldn't say it's firmly in the jazz camp, but it's not fusion, I guess, in the sense of what many people would think of fusion today.
Right. Yeah.
And
it's not.
I guess it's more in line with fusion of maybe, let's say, groups like the Yellow Jackets or the Electric Band or Weather Report, maybe in that sense, but even then it's kind of its own thing. I'm bringing in some global influences from around the world, so from different musical cultures. So it's kind of its own thing. And
I think once you have the global and then you have the singing, you're now definitely not in the Yellow Jackets realm.
Although they did have some vocals on some records.
Oh yeah, we're trying to forget about that one. Yeah, sorry, Yellow Jackets.
Love them though.
Yeah, of course. Oh, wait a second. I was going to say, let's go back to the writing, but I have a better idea.
Okay.
You did this album in a very unique way. Most people do not record a record like this in separate, with everybody being in a separate country.
Yeah,
Can you talk about that?
So, for those who don't know, the whole record was multi-tracked, and as jazz records go, I'm just saying this as jazz because it fits under the umbrella. But as far as jazz records go, traditionally, it's recorded live in the room, and personally, that's how, up until recently, I've preferred to do records. And I still love doing that because it's just its own unique thing. And the fact that somebody is supporting you in the moment is a very unique thing, and that, you're creating spontaneously. That's a different thing. But the reason I went about this record the way I did was simply, when the concept of the record came about, because really I'd been trying to record some of this stuff since 2019, but had to change lineups, or there were iterations, or my sound was changing, the pandemic hit. So when I got serious about working on the record, I was dealing with pandemic restrictions and thinking, okay, how can I conceptualize building this? How can I conceptualize working with the band on this? And even when travel opened up and I was able to start working on the record, I crunched the numbers, and it was just way too expensive. It was just far too expensive for me to, let's say, travel to Europe, then make sure everyone's flights landed in Europe, hire a studio, video crew, and if I'm factoring in string players for this because there are strings on this, then cost for each string player and all the other bells and whistles that are in the music. It gets too out of control. So this was actually the most cost-effective way of doing the record. And Anthony Mutaraja recorded from New York. Santiago Bosch, the guest pianist and keyboard player, recorded from Boston. Patrick Graney, he recorded from Ohio. Quique Ramirez recorded from Spain. And our guest drummer, Antonio Fusco, recorded from Italy, and I recorded here in Colombia.
Incredible, because it does not sound like that.
And that's exactly what we were going for.
You pulled it off. Somehow you guys pulled it off. Whatever your trick was, if you want to let us know what it is.
I think there are a couple of things you have to get into play. For anyone trying this, and I'd want people to try this just so, there are no barriers to making music. Sometimes people feel like, oh, I don't have the money to go into a studio or get like really high level guys. Whereas if you have the money saved up and you can invest more in the high level guys that can record themselves, you can still get your music out there. Unless you want to do the live in the band vision, and that's a vision you want to achieve.
Well, so what did they, sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but who got what first?
So this is getting into the process of how to do it. So one thing I would do is I would usually send to percussion or drums first. And even before I sent to percussion or drums, I did a whole mock-up of every composition. So figured out how long is the intro going to be? How long is the melody going to be? How long is my solo? Is it one chorus or two choruses? Or three? If there's a drum solo at the end or a vamp section, how long is that going to go for? And when I was doing the mock-ups, I wanted the mock-up to sound as good as possible, so I would even play in melodies, add a scratch vocal, scratch solo, everything, so that people could react to stuff. And I would tell people, if possible, try record without a click, because it's all on the grid anyway. But if you need it, this is the BPM. Choose what feels most comfortable. And I think for Memoria, for example, that needed a click just so you get a bit of the push. Otherwise, it tends to lay back a little too much.
Right.
But then I would send to percussion or drums first. They would send it back. I would then send, let's say this is not factoring in guest performances. Then I would send to bass. Bass would record their final take, interacting with what I'd done and whatever the percussionist or drummer laid down. And then I would record over the top, interacting with everyone else, but this time around, no click. I'm just listening to whatever I'm hearing. And the other thing was everyone pretty much did full takes wherever possible. So you preserve that live thing. You're not punching in every time. There are still, little bits and pieces that are left in there deliberately, just because it feels like it. The only time we really punched in is if, okay, I want this melody to enter here very cleanly, or whatever it may be. Something along those lines. Or maybe there's a comp take, as in my comping behind me or something like that.
Right.
But I would try minimize the amount of overdubs possible and do full-length takes.
Well, it sounds great. The record sounds great.
Thank you, man.
I really think that you deserve a huge congrats, because you did something that's very difficult. First of all, writing is very difficult. You did it from far away from everybody else. I mean, you definitely deserve a congratulations.
Oh, thank you, man.
You know what? Before we sign off, first of all, where can people get this record?
So if people want to purchase the record, it'll be available on my Bandcamp. So juandas.bandcamp.com. That would really help support me. So if you guys want to help contribute to that, please do feel free to go there and purchase a copy. Otherwise, if you're streaming it or you want to just check it out wherever it is, it's on all major streaming platforms as well.
Nice. And what if somebody wants to take lessons with you, like composition lessons?
Shoot me an email. Shoot me an email to juan@juandas.com or write me a message through Instagram.
Perfect. And your channel on Instagram is the same name?
Juan Dhas Music, I believe.
Yes, I like I said, guys, get this record, listen to it. You're going to be able to listen to it from the beginning to the end without stopping. You will not tire out. Every tune is great, and you're going to be zodida way before the before you know it. And when you hear the record, you'll know what I'm saying or singing. So yeah, Juan, I can't actually. I'm going to look forward to listening to it very soon.
Thank you so much.
Probably as I'm just wrapping up here.
Means the world.
Hey, thanks for all the inspiration, and just keep writing. We can't wait to see you perform this stuff live.
Yeah, I'd really love to do that.
It's gonna happen. And for all of you universities out there that are looking for employees, this guy would be a great professor. Get him before somebody else does. Okay, that's my plug for him.
Thank you, man.
And pay him a lot of money too. None of this adjunct BS.
Much appreciated, man. Thanks for having me on.
You're very welcome. See you later.
Take care, man.
Bye.
Have a good one.